The modern Israeli state established Jerusalem as its capital almost 7 decades ago, while the ancient Israelite kingdom did so like 3,000 years ago. In spite of this, the rest of the world's nations have yet to officially recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and have instead kept their embassies in Tel Aviv rather than Jerusalem. Well, that is at least until 2018. The United States, Israel's oldest ally, always seems to be the first to embrace Israel. They were the first to recognize the Jewish state on the day of its establishment, and then 70 years later to the day, President Trump, in a much contested move, relocated the US Embassy to Jerusalem. So, what does this embassy move really mean? How does it affect Israelis, Palestinians, and Americans? All right, question. What is it that has united Jews throughout the ages? Well, it's Jerusalem. For tens of centuries, in countless prayers on the lips of Jews scattered in every corner of the globe, Jerusalem, mentioned 660 times in the Hebrew Bible, has been the focal point, the soul and beating heart of the Jewish people. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand be forgotten. The psalm attributed to the prophet Jeremiah took on special significance during the Jewish exile that lasted millennia, and the Jewish people, dispersed across the earth, dreamt of the day they would return to their holy city. Heads up, biblical crash course coming up. Let's jump back to 1000 BCE, when King David originally established Jerusalem as the capital of the Israelite kingdom, calculating that its central location was ideal for uniting squabbling factions. The name Jerusalem itself connoted a vision of peace. Just like today, right? Total peace in Jerusalem. We don't have any squabbling factions or conflict. Later, David's son Solomon built the first holy temple, and after it was destroyed more than 400 years later, the second temple was subsequently rebuilt, standing for another 400 plus years in the same location. After the Romans destroyed the second temple in 70 CE, they exiled the Jews, leaving them clinging to their traditions and the hope for a return to Jerusalem, a constant longing in their hearts. For millennia, Jewish people faced their prayers towards Jerusalem, keeping the holy city as the center of their peoplehood and maintaining the belief that they would one day return to their land and its capital, the holiest place in the world for Jews. For many Jews, Israel without Jerusalem would be like a body without a soul. Let's set our time circuits back to 1947. The Jewish settlement in Palestine had been growing and gaining international support, and the UN voted to adopt the partition plan to establish a Jewish state. In the wake of the vacuum left by the end of the British Mandate in Palestine, David Ben-Gurion declared a Jewish state on May 14, 1948. How did the Arab world respond? Big bouquet of flowers and a box of chocolates, right? No. They declared war, attacking the newly established Israel from all sides, with Jordanian forces quickly seizing and occupying East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, and expelling all Jews from the Old City. The battle for Jerusalem between Jewish and Arab militias was particularly fierce, raging for more than a year until the eventual armistice agreements in 1949, with Israel in control of West Jerusalem and Transjordan controlling East Jerusalem and the Old City. Now, a barbed wire fence ran across the city, barring entrance for Jews to their holiest places, with a no man's land in between the two sides. For 16 years, the 1949 armistice lines, also called the Green Line, which was endorsed by the UN and signed by Israel and the Arab states, kept East and West Jerusalem divided, with the Jordanian-controlled Old City smack in the middle. Then, in June 1967, amid escalating tensions and threats of imminent attack from neighboring Arab states, Israel defeated multiple surrounding Arab armies in the Six-Day War. A united Jerusalem was now under Jewish rule for the first time since the Romans conquered it in 70 CE, and it was a major game changer. As the Jewish fighters later recalled, it was a turning point where hope became reality. And as they set their flag high above their beloved Western Wall, they felt as though they were joining the pantheon of Jewish heroes. King David, who conquered Jerusalem and turned it into his capital. Judah the Maccabee, who purified the temple after its desecration by the Greeks. And Bar Kokhba, who threw himself against the might of Rome in the Jews' last desperate battle for Zion and Jerusalem. After centuries, united Jerusalem was back in Jewish hands, and their capital was once again unified. But on the other hand, for the detractors, this was considered intolerable and illegal. Jerusalem, in any form really, was controversial as the state of Israel's capital, as even the pre-1967 uncontested parts of the city were actually a matter of some debate. You see, the original UN resolution recommending the partition plan for Palestine, adopted in November 1947, designated Jerusalem and its surrounding area as a corpus separatum. Actually, corpus separatum means a separate entity, and it meant that Jerusalem, considered holy to Jews, Muslims, and Christians, would have no sovereign affiliation to the proposed Jewish or Arab states. According to the UN resolution, residents would automatically become citizens of the city of Jerusalem, unless they would opt for citizenship of either the Jewish or Arab state. Although the Jews felt that any Jewish state should implicitly include Jerusalem, they accepted these terms, while the Arabs rejected the entirety of the partition plan outright, refusing to cede any of the region to Jewish sovereignty. The partition plan, corpus separatum and all, was never implemented but remained the United Nations' official position. By 1980, Israel's parliament and governmental offices had been located in Western Jerusalem for over 30 years, and the Israeli Knesset passed the Jerusalem Law declaring United Jerusalem to be Israel's capital. Remember that corpus separatum thing? The UN still considered the entire Jerusalem area, both Western, Eastern, and surrounding Arab villages and Jewish majority towns, to legally be under the corpus separatum status. So it came as little surprise when the Jerusalem Law was condemned by UN Security Council Resolution 478. Subsequently, the UN has declared in numerous resolutions every action changing the status of Jerusalem illegal and therefore meaningless, irrelevant, and having no validity. Despite UN condemnation, many countries did accept that the city of Jerusalem, established in what people often call the pre-1967 borders, was Israel's capital in practice, and dealings had been conducted with Jerusalem in that way since. But for the most part, the US and nearly all other Western countries placed their embassies in Tel Aviv to avoid conflict with Arab countries and keep up a neutral stance without taking sides on final status issues. So this remained the status quo and only changed in 2018 when Trump made his unilateral, unprecedented move of the embassy to Jerusalem, right? Well, actually, no. In 1995, under President Bill Clinton, Congress actually decided that the United States, a key ally to Israel for decades, should legally recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and move the US embassy to Jerusalem. On October 23, 1995, Congress passed the Advisory Jerusalem Embassy Act, stating that Jerusalem should be recognized as the capital of the state of Israel, and the United States Embassy in Israel should be established in Jerusalem. Congress recognized that each country could designate its own capital, and that Jerusalem is the seat of Israel's president, parliament, and Supreme Court, and had functioned as Israel's capital since its establishment. It also recognized that since 1967, United Jerusalem, administered by Israel, guaranteed all religions full access to holy sites within the city and acknowledged that Jerusalem was the spiritual center of Judaism. Becoming law in November of 1995, this stipulated that the relocation of the US Embassy to Jerusalem should be implemented no later than May 31st, 1999. So, what happened? Well, the Jerusalem Embassy Act contained a loophole, allowing the presidential delay of the embassy move for 6 months in order to protect national security interests. Despite promises from both Democratic and Republican presidents to implement the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem since 1998, Presidents Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump signed the waiver every 6 months, each time stating that it was necessary to protect the national security interests of the United States. According to U.S. Ambassador to Israel Daniel Shapiro, it was to avoid igniting perhaps the most sensitive issue in the conflict, likely dooming the chances for productive negotiations. So it was that no sitting president ever pulled the trigger until, you guessed it, President Trump, who announced in 2017 that Jerusalem would finally be home to a U.S. embassy. Upon the announcement of the planned move, Trump echoed the sentiments of the 1995 Act. He said, "It is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This is nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It is also the right thing to do. It's something that has to be done." Embassy offices were established in the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem as of May 2018 to coincide with Israel's 70th birthday, to much Israeli celebration and Palestinian chagrin. So, what does it mean for Israel? Well, in the short term, it's obviously a big win for Israel, while the long-term implications of this decision are a little more unclear and may imply some pretty big concessions for Israel down the road. In fact, it probably serves as little coincidence that just a few months after the U.S. embassy move, the UN General Assembly passed 6 anti-Israel resolutions, including disavowing Jewish ties to Jerusalem and declaring that all actions taken by Israel, the occupying power, to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration on the holy city of Jerusalem are illegal. Trump has said that Israel has gotten a big bargaining chip, and now the other side will get something very good because it's their turn next. Vague much? As far as Palestinian interests are concerned, the slight to their cause could not have been greater, despite Trump's assurances that no final status issues have been resolved. Or by his argument that by taking the embassy move off the table, he was finally clearing the way for negotiations to continue, as debate over the embassy was holding them up. Wait, what? The repercussions of this move will likely be felt for the Americans as well, since, following the announcement, Palestinian spokespeople refused to meet with many members of the Trump administration, including the White House officials responsible for the Middle East peace process. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has said that the U.S. can no longer be the sole mediator of the peace process between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and has instead called for the establishment of a multilaterally mediated mechanism to broker it. In fact, Spokespeople for the Palestinian Authority have said that the only way the US can compensate for its act of moving the embassy to Jerusalem is to recognize the state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. Either way, moving the United States Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem constituted a momentous show of support and friendship to Israelis and was a recognition of the importance that Jews have attached to Jerusalem for millennia. In doing this, Israel was granted the same legitimacy to establish its own capital that is taken as a given by every other country in the world.